Welcome to another installment of Monday Q&A. I hope you've all had a fantastic Easter long weekend wherever you are in the world. To everybody who submitted a question for this week, thank you very much. There's not that many questions this week, but the ones that are there are hyper specific and I kind of want to delve into some of them. So if there's a question you would like me to answer on next week's Q&A video, simply put it in the comments section below. If you haven't already and you like hearing me talk about gear, check out the new podcast that I have with friend of the channel, Mr. Troy Nababan. It is called The Gear Podcast. Check the video description. It's available on all your favorite podcast apps. For now, let's get into these questions. Do I think the Tonewood debate will ever end? This one popped up on the video that I did during the week about playing a 3D printed guitar, so a guitar with an entirely plastic body. It's really interesting to see people's reaction to that one. It seems like some people immediately brought up the whole Tonewood debate thing. And one thing, as with any of these, is you're always going to have the yeah, but kind of aspect to an argument like that, where you can do something like Jim Lill's video, where Jim went through and kind of, did some pretty crazy and fun stuff. It's like an episode of Mythbusters. I really like Jim's kind of video format and the way they're able to convey some pretty complex ideas in a really easy to digest format. But then you've also got a bunch of things in Jim's video that they didn't address. I think the biggest thing with electric guitars and wood is that when you're playing an electric guitar through an amplifier at a pretty decent volume, so when you've actually got enough volume where the material properties of the guitar are interacting with the actual sound waves coming out of your speaker cabinet, which you wouldn't necessarily get at super low volumes when you have acoustic reinforcement from your amplifier, then again, the material properties of your guitar are going to become another non-negligent factor, along with hardware and pickup choice and all the other things that have been discussed at length. I think one takeaway that often gets kind of left in that whole argument about Tonewood matters, Tonewood doesn't matter, is that you can't just reduce a guitar to its parts. A good instrument truly is more than the sum of its parts, because the way we as musicians interact with our instruments happens inside our heads and at the ends of our fingertips as well. There's some pretty irreducible, complex stuff happening there where I can pick up my PRS SC245 and, I know that it's made out of maple and mahogany and it's got a shorter scale length than my Strat and it looks different, but there's this kind of irreducible thing that when I play it, I feel really comfortable and I feel like I play better and I sound better and I sound more like myself. And sometimes trying to boil down something as fun and enjoyable and kind of culturally important as music or a musical instrument down into this level of, I don't want to say vacuous debate, because it's kind of fun to do these deep dives and try to figure out what is and isn't important. Sometimes in trying to figure out what isn't important, you lose track of the bigger picture. So yeah, if you really like playing a plastic guitar and it's hitting the spot for you, of course it's a good instrument. Whether it's made out of wood or not is irrelevant. If you've got a 1959 Les Paul that's made out of the things that 1959 Les Pauls are made out of, then you're probably going to go, you know what, maybe I like guitars that are made out of wood. So I don't think the debate will ever end. That's my really, really long form answer to it. What I do find interesting is that, something like YouTube as a medium gives us this ability to explore things that people could only ever talk about or argue about on forums. Now you can kind of back up some of these things with data and you can make the arguments more nuanced and you can start to ask more interesting questions. I think that's what it's about anyway. Do I think IRs always sound better than factory cabs in digital modelers? I think it's very important to point out that most factory cabs in digital modelers are in fact IRs, and impulse response is simply a way of measuring the frequency response of, in this case, a guitar speaker cabinet, but in general, a system. You take the impulse response and you'll learn a bunch of stuff about it with guitar cabs. You use the mathematical technique of convolution to turn those into Essentially, pretty complex EQ curves that sound like mic'd up cabinets. It's kind of like voodoo magic, except the voodoo magic is called convolution. And convolution works really, really well, whether you're using it for cabinet IRs or whether you are implementing digital filters, you're probably using convolution. So that's what's going on with a lot of factory cabs. I think this phenomena of the IRs that I use sound much better than the factory cabs comes from a few things, but often if you're making a bunch of factory cabs, kind of what you're trying to do is represent a very broad spectrum of guitar sounds, and you're trying to keep as many people as happy as possible. If you go and say buy some Own Hammer or some York Audio IRs, or you get the free Leon Todd IRs that are linked in the video description, then what you're getting there is a much more like stylized, curated representation of a speaker cabinet, often a blend of microphones and a bunch of other fun stuff that somebody has, in my case anyway, kind of set up to dial in the tones that they like. So if you like the tones that I pull, a large part of that are the IRs that I use, and I've set up those IRs through a lot of trial and error and experience. So that's why they work better for me than something like the factory cabs. But you can get great tones with the factory cabs and tweak them with a bit of EQ and have a pretty good time. How do you do the Excalibur stance on stage, especially with single cut guitars? I think you're talking about this kind of stance. The reason I do it is often when I'm playing a guitar solo on a single cut guitar, it's a lot easier to reach the upper frets. Also, when I sit down and play guitar, I rest the guitar on my left leg, kind of creates this nice, very natural, comfortable angle across my body. So I'm trying to create that natural, comfortable angle for me so that I can do kind of big stretches, I can perform legato, I can get my hand into a more optimal position for doing those kind of widdly things when I play a guitar solo. Often as well, it just kind of looks cool and it feels cool to put your foot on a monitor and lift your guitar up. And so much of rock and metal guitar is about the smoke and mirrors and the show aspect and the fact that, you know, you're up on a stage, rocking out, acting like an absolute dork, but it's totally acceptable in that context. So yeah, that's the how and that's the why. Soundguy Horror Stories. This feels like something that could become an entire series. In fact, some people have turned this into an entire series of videos. My overall experience, you know, I've been gigging for well over 12, 13 years now, very, very regularly. I think I did my first proper paid pub gig in 2008. So it's actually more like 15 years now. On the whole, most of the sound guys I've ever worked with have been pretty cool to work with. Of course, most people are going to focus on the really extreme elements of their experience. So, you know, I still remember a sound guy that we had playing in Colorado. It was on my birthday, and this man was like the kindest, sweetest old man. He wore these, you know, very plush leather gloves when he kind of lifted things in and out. He gave us the absolute 5-star treatment when we were sound checking, and I'll always remember that gig for the reason that man doing sound pulled a great sound, had all these great stories to tell, and they were just a lovely man. You know, it was one of those experiences where you're just like, how good is this? We're playing music and the sound guy is absolutely sorting us out. I've also had a lot of experiences though, maybe these could go into the horror stories, where you end up kind of speaking past one another. So I think a lot of those situations are you're working with a sound guy where they see you with your long hair and, you know, your black single cut PRS that's tuned down to drop C, and your bass player that's using a Sans amp that gets plugged straight into the PA, and they immediately form a preconception about what you're going to sound like. And, you know, they might have been having a bad day. They didn't get that second cup of coffee that they wanted. They've got a bunch of other stuff going on in their life. Maybe the venue is being difficult with them. They've got stuff going on, and, you know, they want to spend the least amount of time and energy into, you know, you optimizing your guitar sound. So I think in those cases, I've got a lot better about, you know, not worrying too much if the sound guy is super responsive to what you're doing. You know, as long as they turn your guitar up and as long as the band is audible and hopefully sounds decent. You know, one thing that has happened, and it's got less to do with the sound guy and more the actual PA, kind of horror stories where stuff doesn't work on stage. You know, your wedge immediately just sounds like someone has blown it up and you're getting this awful feedback or speaker crackle or something like that, or something, you know. we did a gig once where there was this PA speaker, and it was just like wobbling from side to side, and you can tell that it was going to fall down. So the sound guy's trying to do sound and then trying to make sure that the entire PA rig doesn't collapse on the audience. So yeah, I try to remember the good ones rather than the difficult ones. You still get those ones where you end up with a sound guy who's telling you, oh yeah, when you sing into a microphone, if you put the microphone really close to your mouth, then it sounds better. And you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. Can you even see what I'm doing on the stage, or are you looking at somebody else on the stage? So, you got to kind of kick back and laugh, and I think have a an easygoing attitude. Sometimes you get sound guys that they, I don't know, maybe they just want to bust your balls or something like that. So I find getting precious or getting difficult about it is never the way to go. And a lot of the times, humor is the way to go. And if they don't want to participate in the humor, I guess that's their loss. One last one for this week. This is a spicy one. Is the NAMM show dying? And I read this question and I thought about a video that I just watched about the E3 show for people who are familiar with the wonderful world of video games. It was on the channel called Arlo. If you're into gaming and stuff like that, Arlo is a great channel. Would highly recommend. Arlo is like a kind of blue Muppet style character voiced by a man in their mid-30s. So I definitely can kind of get on board with a lot of the perspectives there, and mostly focusing on kind of Nintendo-based stuff. And yeah, great channel, would recommend. But I think a lot of the points in that Arlo video about E3 dying make a lot of sense with maybe the NAMM show, not necessarily dying, but I guess companies divesting from it. The main one being that you've had some really big players in the industry choose not to attend the NAMM show. Gibson not attending the NAMM show was a huge thing. There's some of my favorite manufacturers who just never bother going to the NAMM show in the first place because their business model relies on direct-to-customer sales. For example, think of Fractal Audio. You always see threads around NAMM time. Oh, what's Fractal going to do around NAMM? And it's like, well, they have never been to the NAMM show. Why would they spend a bunch of money and resources going to something when they sell direct to customers? The idea of the NAMM show being that manufacturers go there so that they can meet up with their retailers and distributors. And then it's kind of turned into this circus where the public also attends. So it's a great way if you want to go and meet your favorite artists, or you want to go and get your photo taken with whichever old crusty rock star they have kind of dragged out of retirement to stand at a booth all day. I've never been. It was one of those things where in 2020, I was like, I think I'll go to the NAMM show and just kind of check it out and hang out. I think most people I know who kind of do what I do like the NAMM show, because you go and you get to actually meet all the people you only see online. So if you're doing gear-related YouTube stuff, you go and meet a bunch of other gear-related YouTube people, and you hang out and you have a good time, and you'll complain about how loud and noisy it is, and about the hotel and how expensive it was and all those kind of things. So that's something I feel like I haven't had the chance to experience. And I've seen some of my favorite people who do guitar gear YouTube kind of meet up at NAMM, and you definitely get that sort of pang of like, it would be so cool to be there. It looks like they're having a great time. So there's that element of it, which I think is probably pretty important to the so-called, guitar community. But I can understand as a manufacturer, it's expensive, and it's only getting more expensive to hire a booth and fly all your gear and transport your staff there and then hang out for a bunch of days. And then inevitably some kind of sickness rips through the entire crew, and, everybody gets the Namthrax thing on the flip side. So you lose a bunch of productivity there. And then the other thing would be like, well, if you're going to spend that much money, say on launching your new delay pedal or launching your new amp, are you better off doing that? Or are you better off as a manufacturer sending copies of that amplifier to your favorite YouTube channels so that they can make videos about it on launch day? That is something that has kind of transformed a lot of industries, influencer marketing. And it's something that I do. You've seen launch day videos where every other guitar YouTuber has something up about these things because we work to these kind of embargoes. And the catch-22 there is, of course I want to be a little bit different, and I don't want to put my video out at exactly the same time as everybody else, but I also want people to watch my video and listen to my perspective on it and weigh in on it. And if I don't do that, then I get flooded with a bunch of messages about like, hey, are you going to do a video about this cool new thing that everybody wants to know about? So there's definitely that element there. And with the NAMM show, I can see how going, it's sort of like a rite of passage for a lot of people. If you're an artist, well, you go to the NAMM show and you hook up with a bunch of manufacturers, you work out endorsement deals, you maybe get some good deals on products, or you just get to go and hang out and network. The networking aspect of it for musicians is obviously very important, but I think you're probably going to see more and more alternatives to it pop up. And, you know, there has to be that is it worth it element for manufacturers. If you're going to outlay a bunch of money, what are you getting in return? Again, where there's this digital marketplace now where influencer marketing is such a strong thing for brands. And, you know, do you just want to have a NAMM booth and compete with all this noise against you, or do you want to send it out to your favorite YouTubers and have them do in-depth videos? So I can see in that regard how it's definitely transforming. And I think early on with the YouTube thing, you can hear the kind of the wind and the cold and the rain really picking up outside. What was my point with this? That, you know, there was a lot of videos about, hey, I do YouTube videos and I'm going to the NAMM show around like 2016, 2017. That was a genre of video that happened. And now I think a lot of those people are like, you know, what's the point? I spend all this money and I go and, you know, eat crap food all day and I get sick at the end of all of it. And then what do I get out of it? A bunch of footage where it's too loud to make anything out. So yeah, there's a lot of, I can see the downsides of it in a big way, but there is that element where it's, hey, I'd kind of love to go and just network and meet people and hang out and talk about gear and nerd out. So, I mean, it's one reason why I do these Q&A videos and why I try to demo so much gear from here is because, you know, I want to participate in that discourse. And it's one reason why I have the gear podcast with my buddy Troy. And it's one reason why I remind people that I've got Patreon, and if they want to support the channel, they can do it that way and see content that's kind of tailor-made to what the people on my channel actually want to see. It's a pretty exciting avenue for learning things about music and guitar and gear. And I'll also work in that you can grab some of the music that I make with my band Ragdoll. Just check the video description. We've got vinyl records like you can see over there, and we've got a bunch of merch. Our Bandcamp store is the best place to get that, and I feel like that was a pretty seamless segue. Have a great week. If you've got questions for next week, put it in the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts about stuff like NAMM and E3 and these big trade shows that have been open to the public, kind of I don't know, morphing or potentially dying or changing the way they go about it. Very curious to hear your thoughts. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.